Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the State of the Program series on the Crossover U College Hoops Talk podcast. My name is Kanaye. I'm joined with Josh, and today we're going to be rating the offseason of the Iowa State Cyclones. TJ Otzelberger and crew maybe didn't have the year that a lot of people thought they could have. I think they had a ceiling of a Final Four, but kind of fell apart after Caleb Love's beyond three-quarter court heave to beat them in that game. I definitely feel like after that is kind of where the landslide started. Didn't have the best March as well. But, hey, they've brought back a lot of guys. They also did lose a good amount to graduation. We're going to talk about all that. We're going to talk about TJ Otzelberger and where they stack up Big 12 nationally and just what the vibes are and aims of Iowa going into next season. But before we get into that, it goes a long way. You guys watching can help engage with our content any way you can, whether it's liking, subscribing, or just telling other people about our channel. Really goes a long way with being able to grow what we do here at the Crossover. So let's get into it with what Iowa State has lost. It's a lot. I think the most notable name is Curtis Jones, who was the best sixth man in the country this past season. Averaged 17.5 points per game. Did start towards the back half of the year. Nonetheless, it's hard to ignore losing your leading scorer. Someone as impactful as Curtis Jones, I just think is a brutal blow to your program.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, there's really no other way to describe it. Deshaun Jackson as well, who was more of an additional seventh, eighth man, if you want to put him like that. And then Keyshawn Gilbert,
right,
who all three of them did graduate. There's not like a other way to put it. They just kind of had to, move on with it. But that's a huge part of the roster. And a guy like Jones was the glue guy as well. He was a huge part of last year's team. That's why some people had so much hope in them. And I don't know how to really describe losing a guy like Jones. It's honestly a worse loss than it looks. Like, the points per game doesn't really feel the same when you recognize that you losing your sixth man, your glue guy, and additional starting and bench players. It's not something you want to just lose on a regular season. I kind of want to give this like a 6, maybe 5.
Yeah, I think a 6 is fair. You're losing nearly 40 points a night in scoring between those three guys alone that you need to replace. And granted, they did do a fair job in replacing some of that scoring that they lost, as well as considering what they brought back in returnees. But I think a 6 would be fair in terms of how we rate what Iowa State has lost.
Now, do you want to talk about the additions you mentioned?
Yeah, so the additions. I think the biggest thing was probably retention for Iowa State, as it is for a lot of programs we've covered so far. They were able to get back Joshua Jefferson, Milan Momcilovic, and Tommen Lipsey, as well as Nate Heiss. Those guys are all coming back. That's huge. Joshua Jefferson, Milan, Tommen, those are guys who have played high-volume minutes for the last 3 years now going into their junior season, senior seasons. It's going to be important because they know how TJ Otzelberger wants his offense executed. They know how to play up to par with what TJ Otzelberger's style of play is. They know what he expects defensively, as Iowa State's continuously had a really solid defensive identity over the last 2 seasons. I fully expect that to continue. Milan, I think, could definitely break out and jump in his scoring average. Same thing goes with Tom Lipsey. Definitely had a down year as opposed to what he did 2 years prior. If he's able to come back and have similar numbers and replicate what he did in the 23-24 season, then I think Iowa State's in a great spot. Joshua Jefferson, I think, is really, really good on the wing. 3-level scorer, can do a lot, is athletic, can defend at a high level. But I think getting those 3 guys back was so important, and Iowa State's a lot worse if they don't retain, even if they miss out on keeping one of these guys.
Yeah, that's true. And listen, if you're keeping 3 starters, I don't care what team you are, but if you're keeping 3 of them, that's great. To lose a guy like Curtis Jones and another starter in Gilbert, that's a big one. But keeping those guys, keeping a majority of them, is wonderful, especially in the age of the portal. My only issue is just these aren't like very athletic starters. Maybe Tommen Lipsey, he's a great passer. Jefferson and Momcilovic are not very athletic players, if you kind of see what I'm getting.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see what you're saying there. There are athletic limitations. Tommen Lipsey also doesn't bring great size as your lead guard. Granted, the Big 12 isn't loaded with huge point guards. I know they will run into trouble with a guy like maybe a PJ Haggerty, who is around 6'5", 6'4". Someone like that could definitely give Tommen Lipsey a little bit of trouble, but he is a good defender, so that does help with that. On top of those guys they're bringing back, they are also bringing in some fairly talented transfers, the most notable of them being Dominic Nelson, who averaged around 14.5 points per game this past year at Utah Valley. They're also bringing in Mason Williams, who's around 14 points per game at Eastern Washington. Eric Mudler, coming over from Purdue Fort Wayne, should play a role off the bench, and Blake Buchanan, who I honestly think has a lot of untapped potential. I know it was kind of a crazy past season for that Virginia program where Tony Bennett retires right at the start. You're kind of in scramble mode and you're just trying to figure things out, keep the locker room. I think Blake Buchanan can definitely reach a new level. I honestly think he starts for this team, which we're going to get into in a second. But I think TJ Otzelberger can tap into a lot of that untapped potential that Blake Buchanan has.
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of want to say that Blake Buchanan is the best transfer coming in because of that opportunity. He was kind of ignored last year. That Virginia team was too much of a mess,
Right.
and offense was never Virginia's main thing. Obviously, they're a big defensive force, so the 5 points per game doesn't really show the opportunity. Don't get me wrong, Dominic Nelson's also very likely a starter and can replace what Keyshawn Gilbert, lost from graduation. But Blake Buchanan is the X factor on this team
Definitely.
and can be really the key to their success at the higher size level because Milan Momcilovic and Buchanan can really even out the height that obviously they're losing from a guy like Tom Lipsy.
Yeah, which kind of brings me to my next question as to where you rate the ads. I personally have it as a 7. I think the retention is important. That being said, those guys kind of have ceilings, especially Tom and Momcilovic. We haven't seen them kind of break out the way I think a lot of people would have expected them to by now. And just with your transfers outside of Buchanan, you're bringing over mid-major guys. You don't know how they're going to adjust to play in high major competition. I honestly don't think I do like the ads, but again, they need to prove themselves, which is why I kind of have it at a 7 right now.
I kind of want to go with 6. I'll be honest with you. I just feel like it's a little bit underwhelming. I get it. Iowa State is not a crazy market. You're not expecting the most wonderful transfers, but beside keeping your 3 good starters, like Dominic Nelson and Blake Buchanan being your additional 2 isn't crazy. I do get they do have 2 ESPN top 100 freshmen in Xavier Mitchell and Jamarian Bateman. I've heard a lot of good things about Xavier Mitchell, who could later in the season start, but beyond that, the team is not any more deeper than they were last year. And honestly, the starting rotation is generally weaker with what they kept / brought in. So I'm just not overly convinced by the Hawks.
I can hear you out when you bring in the depth. When you bring the depth into question there, I definitely do see, kind of wasn't really paying attention, but I can definitely see now that maybe this team isn't the deepest and they're not going to have a jiggy Curtis Jones coming off the bench anymore for them, which definitely they got a lot of scoring off the bench to replace this year, and I just don't know if their ads will do that. Now, before we talk about TJ Otzelberger, our starting lineup that we have in terms of what we project Iowa State's to be is Tom Lipsy, Momcilovic, Joshua Jefferson, Dominic Nelson, and Blake Buchanan rounding out at the 5. It is overall a pretty solid starting lineup. Granted, Dominic Nelson, we don't know how he's going to perform at the high major level. Blake Buchanan kind of still we're very raw in his development right now, and you just don't know what version of Tom Lipsy you're going to get. Are you going to get last year's version where not efficient, not the best playmaker, or are you going to get the one from 2 years prior where he was really, really good?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the biggest thing. Like, obviously, Blake Buchanan, the big X factor, but Tom and Lipsy being what we saw from him freshman year is massive. Also, the using of Joshua Jefferson, Momcilovic, and Buchanan at the same time, if honestly is a pretty tall backcourt, works out, that's amazing because you're going to have to compete against tall backcourts in the Big 12.
Right. Now, to get into coaching, how do you look at TJ Otzelberger? Because right now, I think I viewed him as higher in the pantheon of Big 12 coaches going to last year than I do going to this season.
I kind of agree with you. He's kind of striking to me as a 2010s Matt Painter. He has a very similar model, keeping his talent and getting in minimal transfers that are plug and play in a way.
Yeah.
So I can see the, opportunities in it, but he's missing the big picture, which I don't know what the big picture is right now for Iowa State, so I feel like that's a hypercritical thing to say. But Otzelberger can't run the same team that got eliminated in the round of 32 and expect results. There has to be some sort of change, and I think if he can develop Blake Buchanan and Dominic Nelson and hope for a revival in Tom and Lipsy, then that's probably a success. But I just don't think he can do that, which sounds offensive, but it's just kind of the truth. I'd give him a 7. I like what you're saying with him being still a good Big 12 coach, but he's being surpassed right now by others.
And that kind of almost goes for a lot of the coaches in the Big 12, it feels like, where, yeah, they might be really solid regular season coaches, but they still kind of waiting for those signature moments in March, and they're waiting for that deep run to go on. But again, he's had success in the past. He's a really good defensive minded coach. And I do think that if he is able to kind of develop some of his players on this roster this year, and perhaps even kind of get guys like a Tom and Lipsy back on track to where they were looking back on the track where they look like they were continuing to progress, then I think that'll definitely bump his score up perhaps in next year's State of the Program episode for Iowa State. Then again to the Big 12, how do you view them stacking up against their peers?
It's kind of a rough one. I don't feel like they're not obviously favorites. That's Houston,
Right.
but they're not like fighting for tournaments. This is a team
Right.
that should be a 3 to 5, maybe 6 seed coming in. That said, in the Big 12, there's a lot of really random forces playing and a lot of wild cards. We don't know how good Arizona will be. BYU looks great. They're probably going to be better than Iowa State by a bit. I feel like Iowa State's like a fourth or fifth option, but has a ceiling of a third, maybe even second option if a BYU doesn't take shape the way we think it is.
Yeah.
Kind of want to give them a 7 because they're competitive, but do not look at this Iowa State the same way we did the past 2 years. This is not a team competing for the Big 12 at all.
Yeah, I definitely like all the points you hit on there. I do think they're in the Big 12. It's loaded with competition. They're going to get to play in a lot of resume building, quad one games if they're able to come out with a win. If they can beat the likes of a Houston, a BYU, and Arizona, perhaps we'll see how good Arizona is this year. Then, hey, Iowa State, like you said, could end up being the third, second best team in the league. That being said, though, I very much view them as probably the fourth or fifth in this league, probably the fourth. And I just think that their roster honestly might not stack up as well as the likes of, again, like a Houston or BYU, and that's fine. That's just kind of how it played out. But again, the Big 12 is a Big 12. It will always be one of the premier conferences in college basketball, and I fully expect the Big 12 to be super competitive this year. And Iowa State is a big reason why.
Certainly.
So what do you feel the vibes are going into Ames, Iowa, if you're a Cyclone fan this year?
Not crazy. I'll be real with you. It's a drop off. It's been a consistent drop off since 2 years ago when they got that 2 seed and everything looked all sunny and cool. And last year was a little bit of a down year. And now this year feels like it could be an even worse year when it really shouldn't. Tom and Lipsy, let's be honest with you, can have a crazy prime. This is a guy that I still think can be an Iowa State legend. Chilovich, Jefferson, Lake Buchanan, like I said before, in a crazy, back front court. But, I'm just not convinced with this team at all. I just don't think this team can be competitive in the way that it should be, and it hurts. I think as an Iowa State fan, I'm a little bit happy, but I'm concerned with the floors. There could be a bad floor.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a double-edged sword here where you're excited to bring back the likes of guys who have been around your program for a while now, being Momcilovic, Tom and Lipsy, Joshua Jefferson. But at the same time, I just still think it's hard to get over the kind of, you had lofty expectations going to last year, where on paper, you were good enough to make a Final Four. And for the first third to half of the season, you played like a Final Four contender. And then that drop-off where they fizzled out in the round of 32, I believe it was this past year. And you probably should have made it further, considering what you did the past year, where granted you lose to Terrence Shannon in Illinois in just what was a really good game. To kind of have that drop off you did, where you probably should have made it further in the tournament after everyone was super excited after being a 2 seed the year before, like you mentioned, and then coming back and not having the best end to your season in both Big 12 play and in Big 12 postseason and NCAA tournament play, then it's kind of tough in terms of how you look at this year's team, considering that, like we talked about in the ads, you didn't really bring in any huge game change. You brought in a few guys from the mid-major level who do have a chance to prove themselves playing in the Big 12. And then you bring in a project big man in Blake Buchanan, who, again, has really, really high upside, but we're not going to see it until he gets to that point if TJ Otzelberger can develop him to that tier of being one of the better big men in the Big 12 this season. So overall, I would probably put the vibes at probably a 6, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think a 6. I don't want to necessarily say a 5. That was kind of the original.
I think a 5 would be a little harsh, but I think a 6. There's
6.
Still a lot of upside with this roster, but you don't know. So
you could be easily disappointed. That's kind of the problem I have if I were a Cyclone fan. Also keep in mind this, Iowa Iowa is looking good right now.
Yeah.
You do not want to lose to Iowa. Losing the state rivalry at a time like this is not fun, and it looks like it's very possible.
Definitely. Yeah. Hey, I'm all here for a Tom and Lipsy Bennett Sturts matchup. I think that'll be a really fun watch this year. And I don't know. I might give the edge to Iowa in that one right now as it stands. But nonetheless, I think Iowa State will be a tournament team, like you mentioned, Josh. I am excited to see them play. I really hope Tom Lipsy is able to turn around, kind of have a bounce back year. I really like Tom Lipsy as a player. Same thing goes with Momsilovich and Jefferson. But I think Tom Lipsy does have a chance to kind of hopefully be like that next Halliburton that Iowa State fans have talked about for 3 years now. Hopefully he gets to that point. I like the kid a lot. Hope he gets back on track. And I'm excited. I think Iowa State does have a chance to make some noise in Big 12. And who knows? All it takes is a few hot games in March to go on a little bit of a run. Iowa State's definitely a team that can do that. But I think that's going to take care of everything we have on the Cyclones today for this episode of State of the Program. As always, goes a long way. Engaging with our videos any way you can. Until next episode on the series, see you all next time.